Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 39. Tony, Natasha, and Rogue. Tony's day in the lab the day before had paid full dividends. He'd managed, with Loki's help, to put a serious dent in his list. Better still, some stuff he'd been waiting for had arrived, and he'd be able to make the adjustments he needed on it. Which meant that Tony had all sorts of delightful little surprises for the Avengers today, once they woke up. Never mind that he still hadn't slept yet. He had goodies and they needed to be up. Only the fact that he'd get his butt kicked by more than one of the bunch if he dared wake them kept him from storming their rooms and hauling them out of bed. Fortunately for his sanity and continued state of existence, the Avengers and their various hangers-on started waking for breakfast about an hour after Tony started wanting them up. The first up, and thus the first one Tony bounced on, was Clint. "Legolas, about time you got up. I got something I want to show you." Clint gave him the stink eye. "Coffee first, Stark, or I will end you!" Tony gave him a teethy grin. "Far be it from me to stand between a man and his caffeine," he said, and let Clint make his way to the coffee machine. Several of the others made their way into the room while Clint was trying to become one with his cup of coffee. Soon enough, the entire gang was in the communal kitchen. "Okay, so," Tony said, "I decided to work on some armor for everybody, including you, Bruceians," Tony said, pointing at him, "because what S.H.I.E.L.D. gave you three is complete crap." He pointed at Natasha, Clint, and Steve. "And if we're going to be doing this, we need the best we can manage. So I did better. I'm going to need you guys to test it out, though. Especially Natasha and Remy, because you two are freakily limber and like to use it, and I need to know if the armor moves enough for you two." Bruce gave him a look. "Tony, armor for me is still a good idea," Tony said, overriding Bruce's objections, "because transforming takes it out of you. Don't think I didn't notice that. And if you can avoid doing it, so much the better. I know you won't always be able to, but any little bit helps." Tony headed over to the pile of boxes that he'd stacked against one wall and started passing them out. "I kept the looks as close as I could," he told them, though he had darkened the blue on Steve's armor/uniform a bit so he wasn't quite so eye-catching. "Also, Natasha, I would really, really, really like it if you'd let me work on a better version of those taser gloves of yours," Tony said, batting his eyes at her. "Pretty please?" Natasha gave him a narrow-eyed glare, then after a moment nodded. "All right, the bigger punch I pack, the better." "Agreed," Tony said, then picked up another box. "This one is for you, Katniss," he told Clint. Clint took the box and opened it warily. He grinned when it proved to be a bow and quiver that looked virtually identical to his current ones. "I kept the key sequences to change out arrowheads the same," Tony told him, "but I managed to shorten the time it takes to get the arrowheads attached down to a fraction of a second. And there's more shafts and heads in the quiver because I was able to strip out a lot of unnecessary weight. You ought to be able to draw and fire as fast as you can move now." "Sweet!" Clint said, eyeing the new equipment happily. "I'll give it a test run after breakfast." Tony grinned at him, then picked up the last boxes and headed for Rogue. "I know that Pepper probably warned you about these, but, well, here. Swimsuit with gloves and boots, and the first try at a skin-tight skin-tone suit to wear under summer clothes." Rogue took the boxes with wide eyes. "Thank you," she said. Tony waved her off. "Think nothing of it. Now, go you lot and let me know how those work for you." Clint made tracks for the basement shooting range, new bow and quiver over one shoulder, and the new armor in its box under the opposite arm. He could test both down in the range, though he planned to do it individually first, just to make sure they worked right separately before he tried them together. The first thing he noticed was that the quiver weighed either exactly the same as his old one, or so close to it he couldn't tell the difference. That said, the balance of it was quite a bit different. It was still bottom-heavy, but not nearly as badly as the old one had been. He started with checking the arrowhead switching part of the gear. He tapped the grip controls in the panel that would get the broad heads onto the shaft while the quiver was sitting in front of him. He blinked at how fast the head got attached. With the old quiver, there had always been a second or two's delay between him pressing the controls and the head getting attached. With this one, it was damn near instantaneous. He played with the controls for a good 15 minutes, using all the patterns that had been programmed into the old bow and quiver repeatedly. The mechanisms never so much as hesitated. Clint nodded and then slung the quiver onto his back. Here, too, there was a difference. While the quiver weighed virtually the same, because it wasn't as bottom-heavy, it sat a bit differently on his back. It wasn't bad necessarily, but it would take a bit of getting used to. Clint ran around the range for a bit, jumping and climbing and sliding around to test and see if there was going to be a problem with the way it sat now, and to get used to the difference. Fortunately, there didn't seem to be a problem with the new balance to the quiver, which made Clint quite happy. The quiver came off again, and Clint propped it against one of the myriad of platforms long enough to fetch out a couple of the non-moving targets in the range's closet. He put the targets about a quarter of the way down the range from where he planned to stand. Far closer than he normally dealt with, but a better distance for the initial test of the new arrows. Here, Clint finally found some minor issues. It was nothing serious, just stuff that was going to crop up when someone unfamiliar with bows and arrows tried to make them. Something was bound to be off, somewhere. Tony's familiarity with weapons in general had helped to keep the problem fairly small, a mere matter of the strings not being strung quite right. A slight adjustment in where the strings were attached would fix that problem. Other than that problem, the bow seemed to function as well as the old one. Clint gave a nod and packed it back up to get Tony to fix the string problem, which, knowing Tony, would take him all of 5 minutes. Natasha was as quick to test out her new armor. She put it on in her room first, half afraid Tony would have given in to his mischievous side and done something to the design. Turned out he had done something, but not the kind of thing she'd been worried about. The new suit, while still close-fitting like the old one, had innumerable cleverly hidden pockets and seams in which to stash hidden items. The belt was about the same thickness, but looked as if it had been reinforced. She quickly figured out why when she found the carabinier in one of the small compartments on the belt, along with a short note explaining what it was for. She worked the clasp repeatedly until she could snap it on and off of her belt in one fast, continuous motion. She'd have to practice latching it onto Tony's suit later. She did some basic stretches and twists in her room and nodded in approval at the way this new suit moved. So far, so good. The question would be if it would hold up to more acrobatic moves. She wasn't worried about testing its ability to protect against bullets and blades. She was willing to trust Tony had it as optimized for that as he could humanly manage, and probably a good bit better than anything S.H.I.E.L.D. had cobbled together for her. When she got to the gym, Remy had already arrived and was doing some warm-up. Natasha gave him a nod, then hit the controls that pulled the gymnastics equipment into position. By mutual agreement, the two of them started slow, with some of the more basic moves in their mutual repertoires. Slowly, they worked their way up to more complex moves. The suit wasn't as flexible as her old one, but it came close enough that Natasha was willing to accept the trade-off of more protection for the lessened flexibility. Certainly, she could still manage the moves she used the most without difficulty. Remy, on the other hand, seemed to be having more difficulty. It made a certain amount of sense. Remy depended heavily on acrobatic moves when he fought, and from the way he moved, Natasha strongly suspected that his skeletal and muscular structure wasn't human normal somehow. Between the two, any sort of armor was going to be problematic. Rogue took her boxes to her room and pulled out the contents. The first box proved to be the full-body sharkskin swimsuit with attached gloves and boots. She set that aside to try on in a minute, since she had a feeling getting into it would be a bit on the tricky side. The next box was 3 or 4 times the size of the one with the swimsuit in it. This proved to have the skin-toned suit in it. Actually, more than one. The suit also had gloves that came with it, also skin tone. Interestingly, they were separate from the suit, allowing her to pull them on like regular gloves. The magnetic zipper that attached them to the suit, and not incidentally allowed for one-handed attachment of the glove to the suit, was, according to the note Tony included, easily concealed by any of the included bracelets or watches. Rogue stared at the suit for a good 5 minutes before she got up the nerve to strip down and put the thing on. She then put her regular clothes on over it and headed for Logan's room. "Hey, kid," Logan greeted her when she poked her head in. She was amused to see that Logan was currently trying on the suit Tony had worked out for him. Like his X-Men suit, it was black, but this one looked a lot thinner and more flexible. "Wanting to see if the skin tight works?" he asked. Rogue nodded. Logan was the only one she trusted to test this on. If it didn't work, he had the best chance of surviving getting sucked by her skin, and she already had him in her head, so she wouldn't end up with another voice in her head. Logan nodded in return, and then, almost faster than she could track, reached out and put his hand over the back of hers. Rogue instinctively tried to yank her hand away, but Logan had anticipated that and managed to curl his fingers around her hand to keep her from yanking away. It took a good half a minute before Rogue realized she wasn't sucking Logan dry and quit trying to instinctively pull away from him. She sagged a bit, then grinned at Logan. "It works," she said. "It really works." Logan nodded. "Take your hoodie off so I can get a good look at it versus you," he said. She obeyed, leaving herself in the regular t-shirt she wore under the hoodie. Logan glanced from arm to face and back a couple times and eyeballed her neck. "Well, I can tell where it leaves off," he admitted, "but I got good eyes. Don't think most people will notice it." Rogue grinned widely. She didn't know how much she'd actually use it, at least not right away. After over a year of hiding under multiple layers and living in terror of people touching her skin, it would be a while before she was comfortable walking around in this, even though it covered as much skin as her layers usually did. It didn't look like she was covered, and that was going to take getting used to. Still, it would be nice to have the option, especially on hot days, to not wear uppity layers. "I gotta go let him know," Rogue told Logan, then grabbed her hoodie and pulled it back over her head before she darted back out of Logan's room. That evening, Tony was well pleased with himself. He'd only had 2 problems out of the lot. Remy's armor was pretty much a no-go. It wasn't flexible enough or in the right places. Tony planned to make some adjustments and try again. See if he couldn't manage to at least make it bend in the right places for Remy. The only other thing he'd had to do was make a minor adjustment to Clint's bow, which had taken all of an hour to accomplish. Now all he had to do was figure out something to keep the big guy clothed when Bruce transformed, and he'd be golden. That, however, was proving to be rather tricky. Oh, there were clothes elastic enough to expand to the degree needed. The problem was they didn't really shrink back down to a normal size once they'd been stretched out. Or if they did, they were so bulky and loose, it was ridiculous. No big deal. He'd get it eventually.